Greetings hobbyists, this is Arsanzavul, and in this video we're going to have a look at how to make lenses like you'd find on cameras, scopes, or big stompy robots. So I've done some more complex videos recently on things like geometry nodes, and I wanted to do a video focused towards people that were more at the beginning of their Blender journey. And this was a video I had requested by one of my patrons, so that seemed like a great place to start. So we'll do this without any add-ons, but as always I hope that there's going to be some bits in there for those of you that are more experienced as well. So I'm going to start by pressing Shift and A, and I'm going to bring in a cylinder. Now, this is fairly rounded, but I do want this to have a little bit more smoothness to this in 3D printing, and this is a 3D printing focused channel. So I'm going to come down to the bottom left-hand corner where it's got Add Cylinder, and I'm going to change this to 64, which will up the amount of vertices around the edge. Let's minimize that again, and then we're going to want to rotate this. Now, to rotate, we just press R, but you'll notice that it does it in, well, whatever direction we're facing, and we don't want that. It's going to make it difficult to work with later. So what you do is you press R and you have a look at what axis you want this to rotate around. So we want this to rotate around the green axis, which if we look at our gimbal in the top right hand corner is the Y axis. So I'm going to press R and then Y, and then that will allow me to rotate this round. And if I just type in 90 on my number pad and hit enter, that will get it perfectly at 90 degrees. Now most lenses will have a housing on the outside, so essentially the metal or plastic bit, and then you've got the lens in the center, so we want to replicate that. So I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode. It will automatically start in vertex mode, but we want to select a face. So I'm going to come up here to select face mode. You could also have just pressed 3, and we're going to select this face. And we want to create this edging, this housing that I mentioned. So I'm going to press I, which insets, and we want to see how much we want to inset this by. Now, if this is for 3D printing, do bear in mind if you do this very, very thin, then there's a chance that this won't work, it won't print nicely, and also it might not be very visible. So you might want to slightly exaggerate this. Then I'm going to press E to extrude it and go back inwards. I'm going to go somewhere about there, and then I again, inset a little bit more to make a gap, and then E and extrude it out. And I'm going to extrude a lot further than I probably need it to be. But you'll notice that this little gap here is going to create a really nice definition between the housing and the lens that you've got. And this is really quite useful for anything where you're getting a decent sized lens. If you're doing this for something very small, you might not want to do that. In fact, let's just Shift and A, mesh, and then bring in a cylinder, and I'll just demonstrate what I mean by that. So you might just want to, let's RY and 90, and then go into face mode, and then we might want to just do something like that, and then extrude straight from there. You're not going to have this nicely defined slight gap, but it is going to make it print better. So if this is something really small, you might want to do that. I'm going to press H to hide that one. We're going to come back here and focus on this. So we want to make our rounded lens now. So let's tab back into edit mode, and I'm going to select edge mode up here, or you could also have just pressed 2, and then I'm going to press Control and B to bevel this. Now mine's going to bevel fine, but I'm just going to escape out of this. If you've done anything to scale this object using the S tool, then that's not going to potentially work. You need to press Control and A and then come to scale, and that will reset the scale so you'll bevel nicely. You have to do that in object mode. So I'm going to tab back into edit mode, and then once again Control B, and we're making this nice single beveled edge, which we call a chamfer, and I'm just going to scroll my mouse wheel up to add additional edges to that. And how far you want to go is up to you. That for a 28mm model is probably a bit excessive, and it's just going to cause you more issues than it's worth. So somewhere like maybe 8 should be fine unless you're doing something on a very large scale. Now, you would also think that you might want to do something like there, where you bring it perfectly into the center. I actually would suggest you don't. I would generally go to somewhere around there so that you've got a better set of geometry. It's going to cause you less problems, and it generally looks a little bit more uniform if you've got something where this distance here is relatively close to your distance there. So I suggest as you make it, you stick to that ruling, but that's entirely up to you. Now, this is all looking good, and we can just go to G, and then we can move this backwards. Notice again, we're going to move this all over the place, so we want to look what axis we're doing it on. We're doing it on the x-axis, so I'm going to press X, and it will constrain it to the x-axis, and we might want our lens to something about there. Just going to tab out so we can have a look at this, and you'll notice this is not quite looking like most lenses do. Most lenses don't have this perfectly rounded shape that we've got here. They have a tendency to be slightly more flat than this. We're going to deal with that, so let's tab back into edit mode and let's look at how we're going to sort this. So the main thing that we can do is effectively just scale these faces now that they're selected, or these edges. So I can just press S to do that, and again I want to constrain that on the X-axis. If I don't constrain that on the X-axis, let's press S here so you can see it, it's going to scale it everywhere, and that looks awful. Whereas if I press S and X, we're going to be able to make this slightly rounded but not perfectly circular object. So that's S to use the scale tool. One thing that might be useful is you'll notice that originally we had this somewhere about here, and that might have been where we wanted it, but as it's scaled, everything's scaled in. If I just undo that, we can see it was here, and the front was, well, about here, and then when I scale this in, so S and X, it moves everything towards the center. Now there's lots of ways of dealing with this with Blender, but the simplest in this instance is to use something called the scale box, which is the scale cube. Our scale cage, there we go. If you come over here to your scaling tool and go to scale cage, it'll create this bounding box around the bits that you've got selected. And you'll notice that each face and each edge and each corner has a dot on it. So we want to move this front section towards the back. So I'd grab that central dot for that face and I can just drag it back, and you'll notice that's not moving it, it's scaling it. So now we've kept this point exactly where we wanted it to be, so that there, but it's moved this part all the way backward. I'm just going to get rid of the annotations as we don't need those anymore. So that's going to make a nice lens. We've got this really good shape, and we can still add detailing, and most of that detailing is going to be to the outside edge. For example, I could tab in edge mode, Control and R to put an edge there, and escape to mean it's central, Control and B, drag that out, mouse wheel down to make something like a single edge, and then I could come over here to extrude along normals, and then drag that out. We've got a nice little bit of detailing. Or I could just select certain faces. If I press 3 to go into face mode, and then Shift and Z to go into X-ray mode, I might want only those. And then we could just drag those out using the extrude along normals. So you've got lots of options there. I will say one of the more fun ones, if I come back to here, is if you go to select and check a deselect, it will select every other one. So you could do the same thing, something like that. Or if you select, check a deselect again and bring up this box, you can say, for instance, I want to have every 2 selected and every 1 deselected. That you have to be careful that what this is adding up to will actually divide by the amount of faces that you've got. But either way, you can play around with this and see what you create and what you like. I've just noticed that there's actually 1 in the middle of that one, but that's not going to be too much of a problem. We're just doing this to demonstrate. One other thing that's quite nice to do, or you might want to be able to do, is you might want to have something that looks more like a scope for a gun, and these have a tendency to have, well, a sort of angled edge to them. And we can do this again very simply. Actually, let me just grab all of these faces here and then G and X those forward, just so I can demonstrate this clearly, is that we want to make sure we can add this angle in. Now, if you've got any detailing further back here, that could cause some problems because we're going to be moving this back. So I'm actually going to select all of those and then G and X and move those backwards a bit, just for now, to give me some space. We can always move those forward again. So what we're going to do is we want to select all of this outside set of faces. So I'm going to hold Alt and select there. Now, the way this works is that I've selected, or I clicked on the edge that was just there where my mouse is, and that tells Blender that we want to go this direction. If I'd have selected there, you'll notice it tries to say that we want to go in the other direction. So you indicate to Blender where you want to select as you're holding Shift. So we're going to select those, and we're also going to have to select the ones in the middle on the inside here. So I'm going to hold down Shift to say I want to make another selection, and Alt as well, and then select those ones in the middle. I'm going to come into side view, and I'm going to press Shift and Z so we can see both of those, and we can see the green lines that these are selected. So if I want to angle these, there is actually a tool that does this. If I come to the side here and drag this out so we can see all the names of them, you come down here, there is a tool called the shear tool. If I click on that, we get this cool funky box, and we need to work out which one we want. Well, we want to go in the direction that this sort of yellowy green one is. So we want to go along this plane. So I'm going to just select that and drag, and you'll notice that it's going to move everything in the direction that we wanted, but it is keeping the correct width of our cylinder. So now if I just Shift and Z to come out of that, we've got this nice angle that we might want to have. Now it is also worth noting that if I Shift and Z again and select all of these faces, notice you do need to press Shift and Z. If you don't, and I select all of these, or just those ones there, then it only selects the half. So Blender will only select the things that it can see. So let's do something like that. We can also do this with our lens. Now this doesn't work quite as perfectly, but it still does a very good job of keeping this relative curvature going, and then we can just G and X and move that back to somewhere like there. Now we could have selected that all in one go, but I just wanted to demonstrate how this worked. So now I've got this lens that's got an interesting angle to it. Now for our one that we were doing earlier that's over here, we can do exactly the same thing. We just need to be a bit more careful with it. So if I just go into edge mode there, Control and B those, to add the bevel, and then we're going to use our scale cage again, do the same thing and move that back. In fact, we want to G and X those all back to about here. We can still do this same trick if I go to select and select all of my faces at the front. I'm just going to hide the one that was in front so we don't cause problems with what we can see. Select those, shear tool, and then we can angle those as well. So you can still do that with this more simplified version. It's just that this adds more definition to the gap between the lens and the housing. So you'll have to bear that in mind when you're creating your object. Hopefully everyone found something useful in that video there, whether you're new to Blender or you're more experienced. If you did find the video useful, please give it a like and subscribe. And if you're interested, hop on over to the Patreon. All of these great people already have, and their support is very, very much appreciated. You also get some really cool things there, like you can get the files that are created during these tutorials for you to be able to have a play around with. Have a great day, guys.